if we are to define, we've been talking about now briefly about the modern metropolis, or the form, spatial material form that the modern metropolis took. But if we step a bit back conceptually, what are the layers or the processes that form this modern metropolis? And we could, again, running the risk of simplification a little bit, but I guess we could go with this assumption, it wouldn't be that wrong. We could perhaps build on these three legs that are all of them related to each other. So you can clearly make connections between these three categories. But on the other side, on some sense, are the three pillars that really underpin the construction of the modern city or of modern planning. And these are, on the one hand, the very notion of modernity, which we sketched a little bit already, the raising of modern capitalism, the implementation of an economic system, which we don't have time to go now through in detail, but it's really essential for the urban development. So a certain economic rationale, a certain economic model that really informs modern metropolis and modern cities. And then a sense of rationality, which is connected to the previous two, and that is coming from the Enlightenment revolution. So it's both a philosophical position, a philosophical formulation, but also an applied logic into the economy, into the modes of production, and into the way of the city is built, into land efficiency is some sort of the bringing of reason and rationality and efficiency into all of the aspects of urban life, let's say. If it gets maybe too boring or theoretical, or you know some of these things, you can let me know and we can also move forward. Otherwise, I may stay in this perhaps a bit dense questions, but I think that it's important to build up the foundations of what we will be discussing later on. And these three elements, as I said, there are clear connections between them. We can trace. Some may argue that they are pretty much the same also, but I believe, together with Ellen Maxins, good economic historian, that it's important to distinguish between them, or to disentangle what's specific, because they don't mean pretty much the same. So, for instance, Ellen Maxins would write that by modernity, whatever else people mean by modernity, and whether they think it is good or bad, or both, they usually believe it has something to do with what Max Weber called a process of rationalization. The rationalization of the state in bureaucratic organization, so the administration of the state, the rationalization of the economy in industrial capitalism, the rationalization of culture in the spread of education, the decline of superstition, and the progress of science and technology. The process of rationalization, on the other hand, is typically associated with certain intellectual or cultural patterns that go back to the Enlightenment. So typically the Enlightenment is thought to be rationalism, an obsession with rational planning, a fondness for totalizing views of the world, the standardization of knowledge, universalism, so this endeavor of identifying and finding universal values, universal systems, universal models, and this belief in linear progress, in continuous progress and development, right? Particularly these two notions of reason and freedom are really behind this process of enlightenment. But now, if we want to look for the roots of the destructive modernity, which, as we've seen, there is, or there might be also destructive sides of it, the ideology of technocentrism and ecological degradation, especially now we're very much aware of, we might start by looking in the project of improvement, the subordination of all human values to productivity and profit, rather than in the enlightenment. So what Ellen Maxenswood is telling us here is that perhaps this equation, modernity equals capital equals rationalism or rationality, is not entirely true, and that there are values in the Enlightenment and in rationality that are not paired in modern capitalism, for instance, or that are even opposed. And if you pay close attention to, the Enlightenment or the development of modern thought, you will quickly find opposing positions, opposing schools, philosophical schools of thought, and even economic traditions that promote or oppose these ideas of capitalist development, rationality, and so on and so forth. So it's important also to be aware that there's just not one history or one way of dealing with modernity, that there are many different modernities, and that there are many different ways of engaging with processes of rationality. All right, and then just to narrow down to modernity, what do we mean by modernity? And usually modernity is used sometimes without distinction, or is applied to processes of modernization, or to modernity as a historical period, or sometimes there's a bit of a confusion between modernity and modernism as a style. Hilde Heinen, in her Architecture of Modernity, makes this distinction at the beginning, to just set up or define the basis in which we can proceed with a more kind of accurate analysis. Modernization, in this way, would be used to describe the process of social development, the main features of which are technological advances and industrialization. We've seen some of it already. Urbanization and population explosions, again, the idea of explosion, right? The rise of bureaucracy and increasingly powerful national states. The formation of the modern national state is part of this process. An enormous expansion of mass communication systems, democratization, and expanding capitalist world market. This is what she defines as modernization. So it's really a process, it's a long-term process, which entails all of these layers or aspects. On the other hand, modernity would refer to the features of modern times and to the way that these features are experienced by the individual. Modernity, in this way, stands for an attitude towards life that is associated with a continuous process of evolution and transformation, with an orientation toward a future that will be different from the past and from the present. Modernism, so in that sense, modernity, we could almost look at it as a historical period, but also as the social, cultural impact of the historical, or features of this historical period, right? And the third word or notion, modernism, would be different from the other two. The experience that modernity provokes, and the cultural tendencies and artistic movements that emerge in this period, modern period, or in this modernity. Some of these that proclaim themselves as being in sympathy with the orientation toward the future and the desire of progress are specifically given the name modernism. In its broadest sense, the word can be understood as the generic term for those theoretical, and artistic ideas about modernity that aim to enable men and women to assume control over the changes that are taking place in a world by which they too are changed. Right? So modernism would be more, if you want, the cultural artistic expressions that take place in the historical period of modernity, right? And usually associated with this belief in new technologies, the emergence of a new civilization, progress, and so on. All right. Is it going a bit too slow, maybe?
No, everything's okay.
All right, and then nobody says anything, so I move on. Again, just to close the circle, we're getting close to closing this loop, or this kind of pretty long introduction. Modern planning. Modern planning is contained in already, we could look at these angles. I mean, it's always, you can approach these questions from different angles. So I'm trying to provide a bit of a big picture, so you can also situate all of these phenomena and these historical processes. Modern planning can be read or analyzed through the lenses I just provide so far. But also, if we specifically look at the planning as a discipline, as a tradition, we could use another lenses or another type of way of looking at modern planning, and that deal with the types of plans. What has been actually planned, in modernity or through modernistic approaches. And just in spatial terms, I would differentiate between these three types of modern planning. One has to do with the reform, so the reform of old city fabrics into modern fabrics. Another one would be plans of extension, so connected to this process of explosion, economic, technological, urban explosion of the cities. So a spatial extension of the old city into an urban territory or an urban metropolis. And then the foundation, that is new settlements created anew, completely from scratch, completely planned, from very kind of top-down kind of planning that regulates, defines a full new model of a modern city. And also to give some references to this, are probably the most known examples of these different types of plannings are for urban reform, the case of Paris, and the transformation led by Baron Haussmann. For expansion would be the case of Barcelona that we'll be looking at now, and Ildefons Cerdà, the planner behind the project of expansion of Barcelona. And then what's sometimes referred to as utopian planning, modern utopian planning, which again, there are several schools, there are several approaches, many different, one from each other, but utopian planning projects envisioning new ideal cities, in a way, new modern ideal cities. And this goes from the garden cities of Howard to the city of the future by Le Corbusier to Broadacre City from Frank Lloyd Wright, and so on. So all of these are projects that imagine an entire new city built from scratch, starting from zero, according to a new type of space, a new type of order, a new type of social organization and political organization, and so on. And just very quickly to give you, I mean, probably you know this, but just to give you a glimpse of this kind of way of looking at modern planning. Reform, in the case of Paris, from a pretty crowded and dense kind of fabric, the superimposition of a new spatial order, which is based on a new type of space, new type of street, in this case of the boulevard, for instance, it's an invention as a type of space, right? As a street that has another program, another function, another dimension, another set of measurements, and is managed based on a different type of regulations as well. Is a space that is not only a monumental space, so it really creates a set of perspectives, a new experience of the city, right? It monumentalizes the city, it creates order in the city, but it also allows the new technologies of transportation to actually move on, right? So it's a space designed for cars. Also, there's a certain idea of social control behind it. So this story of allowing the army to get into the working class areas. So it's a mix of all of these layers that we cannot really, I would argue, we cannot really summarize it into just one aspect. But it's both of a technological, political, social space, but also it's an economic space, a space of representation of a new type of future, and so on and so forth. So this idea of the boulevard that really configures a new geographical, geometrical organization of the city. But most importantly also is based on and supported, like otherwise it wouldn't have been possible to build this new city, is based on new technologies of sanitation, a new network of infrastructure which is built underground that provides hygiene and healthy spaces into the otherwise kind of polluted, unhealthy, dense fabrics of the old city, of the old industrial city, right? So there's also an ambition of Bruno Fortier has referred to this as the medicalization of the city, just the moment prior to a Haussmann, right? A moment where urban planning engages with or applies some kind of logics, medical logics into the city, tries to clean the city, right? And engages with cleaning the soil, cleaning the air, providing light, cleaning the waters, right? So this kind of which now obviously we're very familiar with because we've been in this global pandemic, and suddenly we keep talking about this once and again, right? As if it would be a new thing, how to rethink density in terms of pandemics, how to provide a healthy distance, social distance, city distance, and so on. So these were questions that were very present at the time, both in Paris and in Barcelona, where epidemics were, quite common, and these modern plans that try to provide more healthy, open spaces for circulation, circulations of goods, circulations of peoples, but also circulation of air and on water became really essential for it. So the underground space of the city becomes the fundamental infrastructure that allows a modern life to unfold on the upper space of the city, on the upper ground space. And as you see on top, it's very much a process of cutting through the old fabric, implementing these new measurements, these new types of space, which are superimposed to the former small plots, small land subdivision, and small constructions, right? By superimposing this new order, and it's largely based also on economic expropriations of land ownership, and then a rearrangement of the property in the city. So in a way, in that sense, also is a social project in as much as it dispossesses or evicts some city dwellers and brings new ones. Anyway, so this is the resulting image of the very well-known image of Paris, this new geometric based on boulevards and concentric monuments at the end of the perspective, and so on and so forth. So, all right, expansion, and this I'm going to go very fast because we need to look at it closely later. The project of expansion by Ildefonso Cerdà. similar period than France, 1855 here, commissioned first a survey of the plain of Barcelona. As we can see in the center is the old town, the historical medieval town of Barcelona, and a series of settlements around, and so on the scattered edges. And then in between there is this plain dedicated mostly to agriculture, or clearly referring to the first image I showed, right? The movement or the explosion between the contained space of the city versus the urban, the space of urbanization, or the urban space. So the expansion plan basically defines the growing of the city. Is a process of city growing, city development, which channels or structures, orders this growth from this old medieval dense contained structure into a full system that unites all of this, or integrates all of these scattered settlements into a new metropolitan region, we could almost say, right? And the third case, foundation, as I said, sometimes they are referred to as utopian planning visions. The Garden City project by Ebenezer Howard in England, or Le Corbusier's visions also for the contemporary city, or the city of the future, and so on. All of these projects that impose a new idea or image into a new city formation. All right, and we're about close to an hour, so I'm finishing this chapter here, and then maybe we can take a break. So another way of looking at this, I've been already suggesting a couple of ways of dealing with the modern planning. So even to complicate it a bit more, it's actually too simplified, I would say. But we have this analysis done by urbanist and urban historian Peter Hall, which argued that in fact there are only a few ideas in 20th century planning which re-echo and recycle and reconnect once and again until the present time. So according to Peter Hall, since the 19th century until today, there have been only these 5 types of urban planning, or you could say schools or strands of urban planning, that we still use today. We haven't really invented anything new. We're just rethinking, reshuffling, combining these 5 paradigms of city planning, right? On the one hand, he talks about the Garden City of Howard that I just mentioned. So we'll see in a minute. Second, the Regional City by Patrick Geddes, the Scottish biologist and planner. Then the Monumental City by Cerda and Haussmann that we just saw, Barcelona and Paris. So for Peter Hall, both are examples of the same type of city, which he calls monumental. I would perhaps disagree here a little bit, but anyway, I think it's interesting the analysis he makes here. Then the fourth would be the modernistic city. As we said, modernistic would be the application of modernity into a kind of style, into a kind of applied arts, whether it's architecture or art or other kind of artistic disciplines. So that would be the functionalist city by Le Corbusier, the Siams, so on and so forth. That in fact it's not that new really. It's only a mix of the monumental city and the garden city. So really Le Corbusier is not inventing that much, Peter Hall argues. And then the last one would be the community-based city that follows principles of self-organization, participation, and largely influenced by anarchist movement in the 19th century, which you could easily claim is what we see today in participatory urban design, right? Or participatory urban planning, pretty much going back to that same period. Or if we think today of sustainable or ecological urbanism that probably you've heard about, you would go back immediately to the regional planning of Geddes or the Garden City by Howard. So in fact, it's actually true that we haven't really come across anything that new in 150 years. And just a summary also for you to have a bit of the references. Probably you know these projects, but if not, you can just Google them later on or go to the library. They're pretty well-known projects. The Garden City, the Regional City by Patrick Geddes in the Valley section. So it's probably the first urban project that puts a limit to urban growth. I think I have some slides later on. Puts a limit to urban growth, and these limits are the natural resources of the region and of the valley, right? Something that is very close to ecological urbanism in contemporary ecological urbanism. Cerda and Le Corbusier's contemporary city. I think I can skip a little bit of this. We don't need to explain much because otherwise, yeah, it's gonna take too long.